Hello? Sorry, that was I'm answering a student. All right, great. Great to have you here. All right. So let me get the names down. And we are doing lately, putting it in at the end before after War of 1812 because of my omission. We're going back to the Constitution. All right. And we shouldn't have to, because we skipped it and I had it, thank goodness, on, I had it on the syllabus. So we had a week allotted for it that we didn't use. We just use it this week, and all is well. We could still do Reconstruction. So I'm happy about that. I'm relieved. All right. This, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but this one's a little different. It is not arranged in argumentative write-ups, okay, for you to interpret, but instead it has, I ask you to look at the original Constitution itself and put it into three categories. All right, let me share the screen with you. All right, so you see here, all right, real simple. The first category, enlightened, to me, that represents anything that's tied to the French or Scottish Enlightenment. The French Enlightenment was all about natural rights, checks and balances, transparency and accountability for the politicians, the leaders. All right. And then you also have the Scottish Enlightenment, and that was very libertarian, right? That was for, again, limiting government and with checks and balances. And it also was for a sense of ensuring that the politicians are truly representative of their people, that they know what it's like to live in the area in which their constituents live, know the problems that they face, have the same self-interest, roughly come from a similar demographic, coming from that same region, etc., with the Scottish Enlightenment. So anything that you find in this Constitution of such, I would humbly, subjectively claim that that's enlightened. All right. I ask you to simply find three articles from the first four sections of the Constitution. Okay. Three articles for enlightened. And after you cite the article, what I ask you to do is just in 1 to 2 sentences, explain to me in your own words why you find that article to be enlightened. All right. So we're going to get to the second one, and we'll get to examples. Conservative. All right. I don't mean conservative by today's political spectrum. All right. All I mean is the true sense of the word is that you are conserving human political traditions. All right. So first of all, remember, we have a balance in this new Constitution. We have a federal republic, right? And the federal part is it's supposed to be a balance between what we had before and failed, right? The Articles of Confederation, a confederacy. That's when the states and local governments are virtually autonomous, but only under certain big exceptions do they rely upon the centralized government to intervene. All right. A unitary government is the opposite side of the spectrum. And that is as if Washington, D.C. were to make all the laws for Stockton, California, for all of California, for all of Kansas, New York, etc. And then it would just be a matter of us carrying those D.C. laws into effect. And of course, we don't have that either, right, as a unitary government. So instead, as one of the many so-called compromises, our founding fathers devised a federal system that explicitly gives the central government certain powers and reserves other powers to the states. All right. So with conservative, if you see a centralization tendency when you read the Constitution. And please keep as context the Confederacy that failed, all right, with the strong states and their autonomy. Now, like Article 1, Section 8, it gives a long list of what Congress can do. It could not do many of those things in the previous Confederation, but now they could, thanks to Article 1, Section 8. So any type of centralizing trends, okay, that gives much power to a central government, that is the way things had been, right? This Scottish libertarian thought of keeping government localized, small, and accountable via elections, etc., that is pretty anomalous, right? You have like Pericles leading Athens, you have the Republican early phase of Rome, but you don't see much of it in human history. So that would be an example of conservative. Another one also is democracy. As I mentioned with Pericles in Athens, he still stands out with their practice of democracy in Athens because, again, it was so anomalous, so out of the ordinary. All right. So if you see undemocratic features to the Constitution, I also would consider that conservative. All right. And then as an example of some people being able to put one in at least two different categories, depending upon, kind of semantics and what you how you play with your words and how you describe it and rationalize it. I'm okay with that. That's why I want you to have 1 to 2 sentences as to why, supporting why you put it in that category. But a typical example of that is slavery, right? On the one hand, slavery could be considered conservative. Slavery had been alive and well. I know it was kind of revivified in the 1400s with the Ivory Coast, trade. But even before that, you could say that it was virtually there with European serfdom. And then throughout the world, it was certainly there, Africa, the Near East, etc., Asia. All right. And so you could argue that anything you see about a sanctioning of slavery could be arguably perhaps conservative, considered so. But also the third one, some people have put it down as pragmatic. All right. With pragmatic, I mean that it is, first of all, it is amoral. Okay. It doesn't worry about right or wrong, what's ethically upright or reprehensible, right? And it doesn't matter whether it is on the left or right of the political spectrum. Remember, like with the Gironde controlled the French Revolution, those who wanted radical change sat on the left wing. Those who wanted the status quo or even regressive, go back to the good old days, were on the right wing. And so it doesn't matter where you are, left or right. If something is pragmatic, it simply addresses a practical issue, and it brings about a practical solution for that possible issue arising. All right, that is pragmatic. So some people, when you look at the context of the Constitutional Convention, you could find a lot of evidence for much pressure being put upon the writers, the framers of the Constitution, to give some sanction of slavery, lest the Southern representatives literally leave the convention and refuse to ratify the document. Okay, so you see here, let me go down and give at least one example of each, just my 2 cents. All right. Article 1, Section 2 says that House reps are directly elected by citizens every 2 years and must be inhabitants of the congressional districts which they represent. This is enlightened because they are frequently held accountable to their constituents via election and are privy to what their constituents face daily and having a residence in their constituents' environment. All right. So I gave my reason for which I think Article 1, Section 2 is enlightened. Conservative. Okay, the same article. And that's okay, but a different part of it. That confused me at first. Article 1, which is on Congress, Section 2. and counting citizens to determine taxes and the number of House reps to serve in Congress from each state, the Constitution mentions that 3/5 of other persons and Native Americans do not count. This is conservative because just as in millennia past, the founding fathers did not embrace the courage and progressive tolerance to declare universal citizenship for all people, or not even for that time for all men. Right? So when it talks about the reps, you get one rep for every 30,000 person district. Not even 30,000 person, 30,000 civilian district. So that's one mouthpiece for 30,000 civilians. Okay. Then the Senate is one step removed from popular election. The states popularly elect their state assemblymen who pass the state laws, and they in turn in convention vote on 2 senators. All right. Initially, not anymore, right? It's popular vote now after the 17th Amendment. But back then it wasn't. So senators were one step removed from being directly elected by citizens. Okay. That's 2 major offices. Then you have the president and vice president. They're elected, but when you read through it, it's confusing as heck when it describes the electoral college system of points. It's not popular vote. Okay, so you'll see that. Then they handpick their cabinet members, not elected, but handpicked and approved by the Senate. So that's 4. And then the president handpicks the judiciary, the Supreme Court at least. So there's 5. So of the 5 major federal offices, how many are elected by citizens? 1. Only the House reps. 1 for every 30,000 civilians. And then with civilians, virtually every state followed English political tradition by blood or by having lived for so long in the British Commonwealth were the 2 criteria. It went back and forth through court cases in British history. They wanted to go, most of them, by blood more so. And they also had a political tradition known as stake in society thesis. And they contended that if you do not own a certain allotment of land, you have no stake in society. You have nothing to lose. And so therefore you are not going to be a reliable citizen if a dire emergency were to erupt. I don't quite understand that thinking, but that was prevalent. So at any rate, consequently, virtually every state only allowed white males who owned property to be citizens, as they left suffrage and citizenship up to the states. All right. New Jersey said all persons. It might even have said, sadly, all white persons, but it said all persons who own so much land. So women began to try to vote, women who own land, and they revoked it and changed it to men, from persons to men. So that didn't last long for women in New Jersey. All right. So there's a lot of conservative elements to all this. All right. And then pragmatic. Article 1, Section 8. That federal Congress can deal with practical issues like bankruptcies, inventions, borrowing money, defending the nation against revolts and invasions, etc. This seems pragmatic in that such issues will almost inevitably need to be dealt with. All right. So just take a look at the preamble, just to show you how relatively, in some ways, conservative this document is. We, the people of the U.S., in order to form a more perfect union, so to unify people better than we were under the Confederation. Well, unification was and still is a conservative aim. Establish justice. Okay. Again, a conservative concern. Ensure domestic tranquility, a conservative concern. provide for the common defense, conservative concern. These are the reasons for which we, the people, are forming this union. Promote the general welfare, conservative term. And finally, the very last one is the only one that is enlightened. And lastly, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our future, our posterity. Do ordain this Constitution. But also, I must say, we the people, right, do ordain and establish this Constitution. We are adhering, which was very enlightened, to the social contract, right, to popular sovereignty, that authority. You know, if someone has power over you, he or she just has power until you throw him or her off of you. But authority is refraining from fighting back and saying, you know what, I'll let you stay over me and exercise power over me. I accept it. I recognize it. So authority rests in the consent of we the people. So that part of the preamble is enlightened. All right. So then it gets into Article 1, and they meant Article 1, this was symbolic, is the first article they wanted on there was the most democratic branch, and that is the legislator, right? Because the House reps were elected directly by the citizens. Okay, some of my students believe Section 2, Article 2 is pragmatic, arguably. You could differ with it, or even conservative. No person shall be a rep who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the U.S. and be an inhabitant of the state in which he or she is elected. All right. So 7 years a citizen, an inhabitant of where he or she is representing in Congress. Those actually, I think of the Scottish Enlightenment, right? Accountable by your constituents, know what it's like to live there. But the age of 25, Aristotle and Plato had written that philosophers ought to engage in public service at the age of 30. There's been a long Western civilization notion that, prior to 30, people are still too imprisoned by their appetite, still not mature enough, and haven't been down the road of life long enough to learn lifelong lessons. All right. I already gave an example, the next one. Maybe this is pragmatic. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. So like emergency elections, if God forbid, a House rep should die or something major should happen to incapacitate a House rep. All right. Some people believe that they can choose that they can choose their own speaker, is enlightened, and that they want to give power. They want to give some type of clear separation between the branches in the houses, even in the legislature. And so I don't know. But then the second part, for sure, people would say that it's enlightened. They have the sole power of impeachment, right? Putting a president, a Supreme Court justice, etc., on trial for a myriad of things. And the Senate has the power of voting upon the impeachment and deciding if they want to remove that public figure or not. And of course, we've had President Johnson, not LBJ, Nixon, right? Impeached. Let's see here. The Senate has 2 senators. Some people think that is pragmatic because it was a compromise over representation. The more heavily populated states If it simply is one rep for every 30,000 civilians, Virginia and New York would have dominated, and Pennsylvania would have dominated the small states, right? Like Connecticut. So here in the Senate, they say it's two no matter what. No matter what size the state is, no matter what the population is, etc. Right. Then here, let's see here. I'm skipping some of this, okay? Because I want you guys to do this. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meetings shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall be by law appoint a different day. In many cases, in the early modern era, before this time of 1787, kings had to call the parliament together, and sometimes they would wait years and years before they would have them assembled, for oftentimes nefarious and power-driven reasons. Now it's mandated that Congress has to meet at least once a year. So some might say that that's enlightened. This one's interesting to me. Number 3, each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings and from time to time publish the same. So clearly that's transparency, right? Allowing the public to see what's going on in these congressional meetings. But look what it says here. Accepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy. That's a big caveat, right? That's a big condition. Number 7, some people would say that's enlightened. Number 1, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Reps. And of course, why is that? They're the only elected branch, right? I remember we had fought in the War for Independence saying no taxation without representation. We want our people to approve via those that they elected of all our taxes. Okay. Then this is a check and balance, which is right along the lines of Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws book of the French Enlightenment. It's showing how you have committees. They hear a proposition, they come together, they form a rough draft of a bill, they read it to their house, they have debate on it, then it's called for to have a vote and seconded, then they have a vote. All they need is a simple majority in the House, right, or Senate, and it's passed. Then it's passed to the other branch, they do the same. Okay, they vote on it. Then the president has 10 days to sign it, right, or veto it. If he waits 10 days, more than 10 days, it's automatically as if he signed it. All right. If he or she vetoes it, then it goes back to the House and Senate, and they can pass it, but now only with a 2/3 supermajority, which is difficult to do, but possible. Right. And then they can, hence, in doing so, override his or her veto. So checks and balances, right? Clearly. And then here is a section that I've talked about a lot. Article 1, Section 8. Take a look at those. And here's the thing. Some liberals hated this section because it gives a lot of powers on this list that the central legislator did not have during the Confederacy. However, some of that group or other liberals were at least somewhat comforted by the assumption that, well, since there is an enumerated or specifically stated list of what central Congress can do as opposed to the states, then it's more than implied that if it's not on that list, Congress has no power to do it, right? Except for look at the bottom. Number 18, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So if they can make the argument by looking up to any of the previous numbers of enumerated powers and claiming that something else is necessary and proper to be accomplished in order to carry that right and power out, then they can do it. So to the libertarians, that was like a blank check given to Congress, and they were not happy about it at all. All right. Migration, laws on migration and deportation are given to Congress here in Section 9. Now, you have a right to have a body. That's literally habeas corpus, right? To have a body present when a judge formally accuses you of a crime, right? And that goes back to the early modern and medieval time period when people could be tried and convicted in absentia, like not even being there. However, they said in times of rebellion or invasion, for the sake of public safety, they could get the case going and file the charges against you, even if your body is not present there before the judge. So that part is probably considered conservative to many people. All right. But remember, especially conservative and pragmatic, I may have put something in a different category that you do, but I love reading your 1 to 2 sentence justification for putting it there, because I genuinely learn from you guys still. I always do. And I'll literally sometimes tell myself, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. All right. Look at number 8. That would probably be considered enlightened. No title of nobility shall be granted by the U.S., and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present emolument, office or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. So that you're not bribed by a prince of Saudi Arabia or something, right? And you have no automatic political position given to you, automatic economic license or certificate to engage in some type of lucrative trade or business on account of your family name and bloodline, etc. So there'd be no landed nobility here. And then this is interesting, is Section 10. It says the things now that states can no longer do. And some of them are obvious. They can't raise an army. They can't make their own treaties with other states or other countries. They can't coin money. If a military emergency erupts, their state militia can be usurped, taken in by the National Armed Forces. They're limited in what they can do with taxing imports and exports if they're on the coast, especially. because those powers are now given to federal Congress. Keep a standing army, etc. Then it goes to the presidency. Notice nothing is stated about 2 terms. George Washington started that as a precedent, and we did not put it in until after FDR. In your 17B class, Franklin Roosevelt during the Depression and World War II, he ran for and served 4 terms. Well, he died in the midst of his 4th term. All right. Then it gets into the electoral system, which I'm not going to, okay? Of choosing. The electors are equal to the number of House reps and senators that each state has. But notice this one, number 5. No person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of the Constitution shall be eligible to the office of president. And he must be 35 years old and been 14 years a resident in the U.S. Interesting. Number 6, something should happen with a president. The buck is passed to the vice president. And the vice president votes when there is a tie in either of the 2 houses of Congress. Other than that, not much is given to the vice president in this document to do. They're to be paid, just as the congressmen are, the president is to be paid. And then, of course, number 8, almost anybody would contend that that is enlightened. Before the president enter on the execution of his or her office, he or she shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So that's the simple notion of the rule of law, not ruled by one man or woman who is our chief executive, but he or she is swearing fealty, loyalty, almost even obedience to a written document, to the Constitution. Now, the president, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, that's you could make the argument that that's pragmatic. You could make the argument that it is enlightened, ironically, in saying that you have a civilian leader over the military. But it also can be considered conservative, because by the time of this Constitution, most kings in Europe and queens controlled their armies and sent them where they wanted for war. Notice also a little loophole here. Congress has the power to raise an army and to declare war. Then the president is in charge after that. But in many instances, remember, like we read with Thomas Jefferson sending the USS Philadelphia to the North African coast of Tripoli, and without even telling Congress, much less getting their permission or declaration of war, that was a loophole that lasted for a long time. That presidents thought, well, I know we haven't declared a war, but I'm going to, as a commander-in-chief, go ahead and send these men over to this area or that area and have them engage in combat, right? That is not going to be fixed, you guys, until Vietnam, until toward the end of the Vietnam War, when Lyndon B. Johnson had sent so many men, so many young boys over there to fight and die without a formal congressional declaration. Some people think this is enlightened. Some people think that it is pragmatic, that it's practical. The president shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. So notice they are sovereign as a separate branch to make whatever laws they want. Okay. But the president is supposed to give them context as to what the major issues are in case they're not aware of them themselves, and to give suggestions for them. Some presidents, we've had the whole spectrum. We're very timid in this respect and not very helpful. And some presidents, like Teddy Roosevelt in your 17B class, said, here's a list of laws that you guys better make. I want you to address this issue, and that issue. And if you don't, I'm going over your heads and I'm going to the people in the press and telling them that Congress won't deal with these issues. They called it the bully pulpit, that type of method that Teddy Roosevelt used. All right. And then Article 3, when you get into, I mean, first of all, the fact, right, is this is interesting to me too, okay, is at first glance, it seems like it's an axiom you don't even question. This is conservative. These are well-educated, oftentimes already wealthy men who are handpicked for life, right? How could you argue against that? That it's clearly conservative. Well, one thing to remember, okay, as we're going to get into it very soon, is theoretically the national legislature, especially after 1917, when senators became popularly elected as well as House reps. Also, especially after enfranchisement, or the fancy word for granting citizenship, finally became universal, okay, with everybody voting, or able to vote at least, theoretically. The idea is Congress, the national legislature, has to capitulate to the desires of the majority if they want to stay in office and get reelected, right? And the president, limitedly so as well, by way of his 4-year election, elections every 4 years, and an electoral college, albeit. So if everyone appeals, if both those branches feel pressure to adhere to what the majority of Americans want, as the old Greeks would say, like Aristotle and Plato, since when does the majority know what's good for the country? Just because it's the majority, does that mean they're going to be correct on every issue? And that's a rhetorical question, right? They would say, no way. So somebody has to look after the numerical minority, those who are getting outvoted on everything, right? So who better than well-educated judges who have no need to make popular decisions because they're in there for life. So they theoretically are intended to look out for the numerical minority. And then these are their original jurisdiction. Now, from what I understand, and I could be wrong, because I just took the basic political science courses, like 2, and that's it. And not for lack of interest, it just worked out that way. But from what I understood, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, with original jurisdiction, there was almost intended by the founding fathers a mandate, a degree to which it's mandatory that the Supreme Court adjudicate. And adjudicate is like referee and decide these court issues. Okay, so a citizen from one state suing a citizen from another state, a citizen from one of the states suing a separate national country. That has happened. Or a citizen from another country, right? So it gives a list of all these, contingencies, all these what ifs, and saying that when those cases arise, it is the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court to adjudicate them. All right. And then, of course, as you know, if it's not directly on that list, the Supreme Court has discretion. So you hear many cases, right, of people appealing and just waiting to see if the Supreme Court or beneath them, the appellate courts, are going to accept your case or not. We define treason. All right. And comity. Your citizenship follows you. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. That was not carried out in the South. You had limited citizenship rights for some African Americans by the antebellum period, and they were not accepted if they were to move to the South. Okay. And then look at this one. This is the fugitive slave article. Number 3. No person held to service or labor. Notice how they use euphemisms, right? Like a euphemism, like saying he passed away, because you don't want to say he died. You try to milk it down a little bit with a more benign term. So notice they don't put slaves in here, but they're talking about slaves. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another state, shall, in consequences of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from his or her service of labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So the master can chase you down across several states and have you extradited back to his southern domain. All right, that clearly was something done for the southern reps. All right. This one's interesting right here. We're going to go back to it. Number 2 of section 3. Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the U.S. Okay. So remember, the Northwest ordinances, they dealt with the logistical, mainly land issues, right? So if you conquer or if you purchase land, right, which it happens time and time again throughout the course of this class, right, in the content, the curriculum, then the land survey office is supposed to put everything into 6 square acre plots, so many of them to make a city, so many of those to make a county, and so many of those to make a state. The land survey office is supposed to publicly sell or auction that land. Then when you're up to a certain number of people, for a while it was 60,000, then you could petition for statehood. You have a general election, you elect reps, they have a convention, they write a constitution for the state. It cannot contradict the federal constitution, violated in any major way. Then it's given to Congress, and Congress has to approve it. And then you're annexed or added as a state. Okay. So Someone have a comment? So that's the economic and practical facet to it, right? But what about government? Because look at the very next one, section 4. The U.S. shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government. Now, technically, after Rome, that means to have at least some of the offices elected by citizens. But to a lot of people, they felt they didn't take it just that literally and minimally. They wanted it to be like that the government is representative of the people and accountable to the people, and there will be a certain level of freedom allowed in each state because of this promise of every state having a republican form of government. When we get into debates between the North and South going into the Civil War, some Northerners will accuse the South and the Southern states of violating this section, saying your state of Alabama, etc., does truly not have a republican form of government. But on paper, at least, they were supposed to, right? But notice it doesn't say that about territories. So remember with the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson didn't trust the Creoles. He didn't trust the Cajuns. He didn't trust the U.S. military because they're involved in a conspiracy to sell it. He didn't trust the natives. He didn't trust the Spaniards. And so he handpicked 21 guys in the southern region and 21 guys in the northern region to rule over that territory until they could apply for statehood. And he was supposedly the Democratic president. So clearly, right, you don't have to have representative government when it's just a territory. But nevertheless, back to number 2, Congress shall have power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations about the territories. So what I'm alluding to for the soon-to-be content is that does that clause right there give Congress and the federal government the power to dictate and say, okay, in the Western territories, slavery will be prohibited? Because to many Northerners, they thought it did. All needful rules and regulations in the territories. And of course, the Southerners disagreed. Article 6.1, this is definitely considered conservative. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States and under its Constitution as under the Confederation. So if someone owned a slave before this new government, he still owns a slave. If someone had money owed to him, he still has that money owed to him. This is the property clause. So the wealthy founding fathers, right, and clauses like this showed that at least in some instances, they were looking out for their self-interest. And then it's stated a little bit more clearly here. This Constitution, skip a couple lines, shall be the supreme law of the land. So they're trying to make that amply clear, right? That in the United States, we follow the rule of law, not the rule of man. Right? And then you could treat these separately, you guys. You could choose. I ask you, please, because that would to me be too easy, so that you could have just overlooked everything prior to this. Please don't use more than one amendment as an example for it's likely going to be enlightened. Okay, I'd like you to find it in different sections, not just here. But if you want to use one, as an example of enlightened, by all means. So the first one, right? That has Voltaire written all over it, right? Peacefully protest the government, write what you want about the government, speak what you want about against the government, have your freedom of religion. 2, the right to bear arms. Remember, that was Scottish, saying we don't want to have a day when our military establishment can turn on its own people. So hence, we need to be amply armed to be able to fight our government back should we have to. And boy, they would probably be disheartened, those who were highly influenced by the Scottish Enlightenment, if they saw the fact that our federal government has atomic weaponry and all that, right? As far as their power over us and over others. The Fourth Amendment has been likened to your right to privacy. You, your stuff, your person, your car, your houses, etc., right? There must be probable cause that warrants a warrant, right? Or a writ, giving the legal authorities the judge's permission to check your stuff for incriminating evidence. And then I plead the Fifth, right? You do not have to incriminate yourself. All right. Also, double jeopardy. Once you've gone to court and have been exonerated or declared innocent of a particular count and crime, they can't put you back in there on the same charges. And neither can you be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So the government can't kill you, can't incarcerate you, at least for a long period of time, right? Because they could hold you in jail while they're waiting for trial, nor take your property until you have had your due process, which we're about to get into, and been duly convicted of a crime. Nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And that is eminent domain, right? So if they're building a hospital, a freeway, an elementary school for the public use, the local, state, or national legislator can force you to sell it back to them for public use, but you get compensated for it. What I find interesting is the context of this, right? Is that you're being accused of a crime. The government's trying to punish you and incarcerate you. So therefore, they can't take your life, liberty, or your property in that instance. The slave owners are going to use this clause, the Fifth Amendment, and say, see, until we have been convicted of a crime, duly convicted in a court, you can't take our slave property from us. So they're gonna allude to that Fifth Amendment for their right. All right. So you have a right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. So if anybody knows you, has any reason and so forth there to be stricken from the jury, okay, of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, that's not always adhered to, right? Because if they could contend that it is a hostile jury, that the demographics, like let's say when we get into like a black suspect, and he's in an uppity white neighborhood, he might say, I have a hostile, I don't have a constitutionally sympathetic jury. So they could change the venue. Okay. But you're supposed to be, that's what they mean by your peers, someone from your same demographics who could relate to you. You have to be informed of the nature and the cause of the accusation. all hostile witnesses that claim, right, things about you that you had done wrongfully, you have a right to counter their claims and question them. You can compel witnesses in your favor. I find that interesting. Someone says you did something right out in the road, and you look over at, some shop, and a guy is standing there with his cell phone filming it, and he's looking at you kind of nervously. You can make that guy come to court and vow that you did not do what was claimed that you had done out there in that street. And then, of course, have the assistance of the counsel for his defense, to have an attorney represent you, whether you can afford one or not. Then I'm going to skip down to number 10. The powers not delegated to the U.S. by the Constitution, nor directly prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. So some people would contend, for instance, right? Nothing was said about education and schooling. Nothing was said about police departments and fire departments. Nothing was said about, euthanasia for those who are sick, abortion rights, etc. So some people would contend that strictly under Article 10, the 10th Amendment, that those ought to be state issues. All right. So any questions, you guys, as far as what I'm asking of you? Just 3 examples of each. 3 examples of something that was enlightened, with a sentence or 2 explaining why you put it there under that term. 3 for conservative and 3 for pragmatic. And I'd love if you spread them out, so that overall, when I look at your assignment, I find something from Article 1 on Congress, something under Article 2 with the presidency and executive, something under Article 3 with the judiciary, and then maybe something with Article 4, everything else that was added. And of course, by all means, you could include one of the amendments in the Bill of Rights. All right, you guys. Well, if you guys are okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you go. Okay. I wish you well on this.
Thank you, teacher.
Thank you, Jacob. You guys have a good day. Okay.
All right. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to try and get this done today, maybe, or today and tomorrow.
Good. That'd be great. Get it done with. That's a great habit.
It was good for going over all the articles and the sections and telling us which ones could be used as enlightened or progressive and whatnot. I took a lot of notes.
Good. I hope it was helpful. Yeah, I'm certainly
Yes, it
no
was
expert
very
on the
helpful.
Constitution, but I have a decent command over it.
No, I think in my opinion, you're quite knowledgeable, at least when you were going over it.
Just by repetition, teaching U.S. history. You guys have your jobs you do. This is my job to know this stuff. All right. So you guys have a great day. You guys be careful.
Thank you, teacher. All right. Take care then.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a great weekend.
You as well.
Thank you.
Thank-
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I wanted to ask real quick.
Yeah.
Will the Zoom meeting be on Canvas, like the recording?
Yes. I'll see to it that it is on there soon. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, Kevin.
Have a good day.
You as well. Bye-bye.